Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our virtual Freight Rail Supply Chain Roundtable. My name is Greg Regan. I'm the president of the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO. TTD is the largest transportation federation in the country, and we represent 37 labor unions across all modes of transportation, including all of the railroad worker unions involved in this national contract negotiations with the freight railroads. Despite the hard work of our nation's dedicated rail and port workers, there is a looming cargo logjam, just as retailers are gearing up for a busy holiday season. Last week, Los Angeles Port Director Gene Soroka sounded the alarm over cargo backlog at the port and predicted it could last 4 to 6 weeks, as 35,000 rail-bound containers are currently sitting on the docks while waiting for trains. I'll serve as moderator for today's discussion. We have leaders from several of those freight rail unions and a port labor leader who speaks on behalf of the Longshore brothers and sisters on the West Coast. Also joining us are a couple of shippers who will provide some great insights from the customer perspective. I'm also delighted that we have a special guest joining us today. It's my honor to introduce Marty Oberman, chair of the Surface Transportation Board. Chair Oberman, the focus of this roundtable is very much aligned with the focus of your board. As chairman of the STB, we welcome your perspective on the current state of freight rail service and how it's affecting our country's supply chain. So please, we welcome you to share your remarks.
Thanks, Greg. I'm delighted to spend a few minutes here with everyone this morning. I'm sad to say that the current state of the freight rail is not great. To put this in sort of short-term perspective, as freight rail service has been less than robust over the last couple of years and really has deteriorated to the point of causing urgent problems for a number of rail customers. We decided at the board to hold what were really hearings on an emergency basis last April to really air this problem out. And it was a very enlightening hearing, attended not only by the Class 1s, but very prominently by rail labor and by shippers. And I think the board members and the public learned a great deal more about, in detail, just what the effects of the railroad's business practices over the last 6-7 years have brought to freight rail and to our economy. It's really not much of a mystery. I've been talking about this publicly for some time, and I'm sure members on this meeting are aware of it, but I don't think there's much doubt that these problems have all been precipitated by the great reduction in rail workforce over the last 6 or 7 years prior to the pandemic. The Class 1s as a group cut 45,000 workers, about 30% of the entire workforce. And during that period of time, of course, their revenues didn't get hurt and their profits went up substantially. And that's still happening as service continues to be in very difficult straits. The Class 1s numbers haven't dropped much at all. I mean, they're still making money. Their still profits are up. Some of their stock prices have dropped a little bit, but they're doing just fine at the corporate level. I think what really set us into the current very bad situation was that when the pandemic began, after having already cut 30% of their workforce, the Class 1s cut another 12,000 workers, great number of them T&E, with no thought to the fact that these are highly trained people, that it takes a long time to replace them, and that it was foolish to assume people would rush back when called on. Nobody knew how long the pandemic would keep people out of work, and workers need to earn a living. They've got children to feed and mortgages to pay. I can't tell you how many CEOs have said, well, when we furloughed workers, they always came back. And we didn't know how long this was going to last. And I have said, well, did you think the workers knew how long it was going to last? Did you think they would just sit there month after month waiting for you to figure it out without trying to take care of their families? Very, very poor business decision making on their part. And since the summer of 2020, as freight rail has come zooming, I mean, the need for freight rails comes zooming back, all of the railroads have been struggling to find workers. And as a result of those hearings in April, we have ordered the four large U.S. railroads. We ordered them to supply us with service recovery plans. Their first effort was really, I'll just say insufficient. That's a euphemism. We entered another order, ordering them to give us more detail and a great deal more reporting, particularly on workforce levels and training class levels. How many people were graduating? How many people are staying with the job? And we ordered them to give us 6 months targets of where they would be 6 months from that period, which was early May, without any notion that 6 months all the problems would be solved, but we at least wanted to keep tabs on them because the railroad's past statements to the board over the past couple of years were, well, don't worry about us, we'll be fine. And clearly they aren't fine. And I have to say that if you look at the regular reporting metrics we're getting, they are a long way from their 6 months targets, and we're about halfway through that 6 month period. So I'm not optimistic about the pace at which rail service can recover. It is affecting every aspect of the economy, from the problems at the ports to all of our internal needs for freight service. Some of you have probably seen the fact that we had to issue an emergency order a few weeks ago to keep one of the major poultry producers in California from having to euthanize, excuse me, millions of their livestock because of the inability for UP to deliver feed trains. We've had ethanol plants shutting down for a day at a time here and there because they can't get empties to empty their tanks into so they can keep production going. It's just happening all over the country and is obviously hurting the economy and contributing to inflation. So I think it is a serious, serious national problem. We're using every tool that we have available at the board to oversee this and to hold the railroads accountable. I intend to continue leading the board in that direction, and it's not hard to lead them because all the board members are quite concerned about this. And I think we're all of the same mind that we have to keep our eye on the class ones. They are, and I'm not convinced, Greg. I asked them all, have you learned anything from this? Are you committed to not necessarily hiring 45,000 people back, but are you committed to having enough people on the workforce so you can handle all the ups and downs, which we know happen to freight rail? We've known this for 200 years. You have floods, you have washouts, you have forest fires, polar vortex. The pandemic's not the first thing that came along to interrupt rail service and show the need for a sufficient number of workers. I haven't gotten a clear answer or any answer. Mostly what I hear is it's a tight labor market and it's hard to hire people. And I have said, you know, when markets are tight, prices go up. Have you considered that? And we'll see.
Well, no, thank you. Thank you for that insight. I know it's this is a crisis. We haven't, you know, this is going to require some really long-term solutions that are not, these aren't going to be quick fixes. And I think that what you're doing to highlight the problems are really helpful here and will hopefully help us lead to a resolution of a lot of these issues. The rail and port labor leaders and the shippers who are here joining us on this call know, just as you and I do, that workers and customers didn't cause these backlogs. Freight railroads became one of the biggest bottlenecks during the pandemic supply chain due to their business operating decisions. So thank you so much for all the work you're doing and for joining us today. And we're going to go into our Q&A here. Herman, I wanted to start with you. Many people falsely believe that the problems with freight rail service started during the pandemic when in fact it started much earlier. When did things start to go wrong with freight rail service for your companies and the people that you represent? Herman, I think you need to unmute.
There you go. I didn't think we had the ability to unmute if we were muted by the moderator. So thanks for that tip. So, I appreciate, when did it all start? I'm one of these root cause guys. So it's actually, it's been a decade. In 2012, a certain investor, let's call him Mr. Mantle, joined the board of a railroad in Canada called CP. And during that 4-year term as a director on that board, he got to know their CEO, and the two of them gained a certain amount of respect for each other, we'll say. And, sure enough, a few years later, that same investor manages to, shall we say, get some influence at the CSX Railroad and places his former valued acquaintance and puts him in as the CEO of CSX. So he introduces something called PSR and suggests that it's the right thing for railroads to do. And certainly he didn't have the greatest reputation at CP for not taking care of customers and taking care of profits, we'll say. So he did the same thing at CSX. So was that the beginning, or, let's fast forward to the STB hearing where the STB had that CEO in their offices, and many of us were there. I was one of them that was there that testified on behalf of shippers and said, this PSR thing isn't working. We're not getting service, some issues, some major issues. And again, at that time, and no fault to Mr. Oberman and his team. I want to make sure that that's clear because none of the current team were even around then. But that Surface Transportation Board decided that, this PSR thing should be given a chance, and we'll just let well enough be well enough, and we'll let those guys figure it out. Is that the start? I don't know. So then what happens is all the other railroads, said, well, if they're getting away with it, why don't we give it a try? They cut, they burn, they throw employees aside, they put equipment in storage, they do everything they can to increase their profits. And so the railroads, which are more or less protected in the industry that they're in, right? Not you and I can't go out and start a railroad tomorrow, so they're protected. But they're being run by Wall Street all of a sudden because one investor did it with one major railroad. The other investors were putting pressure on the other CEOs, and they followed suit. So what we have today, and I very much agree with one of the comments that Mr. Oberman made, it's like, what do they say? The horse is out of the barn, the cow's long gone. I don't know, however you want to say it, but they've let a lot of great employees go. We can't just reverse that tomorrow. I don't believe any of them want to provide the level of service that they're providing today. I can't believe anybody would want to provide that bad of a service to their customer. But they were foolish to think that they could just quickly spin things around. They can't. I think the solution's probably at least a year away. We need our Surface Transportation Board to continue to monitor their metrics, especially how many people we are hiring back, how many pieces of equipment we're putting back in. And we need the railroads to change their attitude towards, do we serve Wall Street? Do we serve shippers? Do we serve our employees? Obviously, there has to be a balance. And the C-level suites of our railroads today don't understand that balance. And hopefully, with Mr. Oberman's assistance and a few of us squeaky wheels, maybe they'll start to think about how do we find a better balance than what we have today.
Thank you, Herman. And Herman is with the Private Railcar Food and Beverage Association. So obviously his organization and the companies he represents rely heavily on freight service. So they are feeling this pinch very directly as we confront these problems. Vince, I wanted to turn to you next. How did we get to this point where freight railroads become one of the biggest hurdles in our supply chain in terms of delivering goods throughout our country?
Thanks, Greg. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. My name is Vince Verna. I'm Vice President and National Legislative Representative for the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. We're part of the Teamsters Rail Conference. I I guess we're going to hear a lot of the same things from different perspectives. I'm also a locomotive engineer from one of the Class 1 railroads, 28 years in the industry. So from the labor perspective, from the cab of the locomotive, we've really seen and heard that things have really started going downhill with the adoption of the new business model, starting really to provide a lot of discontent in 2015. The model is precision scheduled railroading. It's not precise and it's not scheduled, and we don't think it's railroading either. It's created a very chaotic and ineffective way of doing business, and this is all before anything happened with the COVID-19 pandemic. The supply chain, as we know it, has been broken because the railroads broke it. A lack of crews and locomotives, it really means less service and a drop in the quality of service. It really comes out of Wall Street, where the railroads are chasing maximum profits to minimize and trying to minimize their overhead. And with less people, less equipment, these for lack of a better way of saying, the chickens are coming home to roost. The freight railroads have reduced their headcount by about 45,000 workers in the last 6 years. It's placed a much greater strain on the workloads for the people who have stuck around. And there is just a crucial nexus between the supply chain and the workers who keep it functioning. So the railroads have cut way too deep. They cut too deep thinking they were trimming fat, but they've cut into the bone. This coupled with punitive attendance policies in the last year, and really before that from all the Class 1 railroads, have made a really already tired and overtaxed workforce even more tired and burnt out and exhausted. This PSR really is a failure for the employees who work on the railroads. It's a failure for customer service. We have been in many talks with shipping associations, trying to tell them that, look, the workers that we represent, the locomotive engineers and trainmen, they're highly skilled professionals, and they take a lot of pride in their work and their service. This constant cutting business model from the railroads, it really isn't sustainable. When I hired on the railroad way back in 1994, after safety, the next thing after safety was customer service. And it was drummed into our heads to be very proud of that, and to getting cars to customers was really the number one thing, and to do it safely. So the railroads need to return. It's our belief they need to return to an operating model that puts safety and customer service back before short-term Wall Street profits. If we're going to have a functioning supply chain and a workforce to support it. The railroads have really forgotten to invest in their workers at the expense of remembering to buy back their own stock. So we're looking forward to seeing a turnaround in, like Chairman Oberman said, and just the way that the railroads work, their attitude toward their business model. And we're ready to be the workforce that helps them on their way out, but they really need to change in their outlook of how they're doing things.
Yeah, and one of the things you raised there is I think really important, because I've been lucky enough to travel around the country quite a bit and speak to rank and file members and speak to the people who are lifelong railroaders, and they want to see a growing, thriving system. They want to be able to deliver and have a system they're proud of, but they also need to be compensated for what they're worth and what they're delivering for the railroad. So thank you for your insight. Frank, I know you were in the spotlight over in LA Long Beach when we had our major supply chain crisis a year and a half ago. But can you tell us what you've seen at the port and at the ports, and what your experience has been?
Sure. Thanks, Greg. Well, good morning. First of all, my name is Frank Ponstilion, and I serve as the Coast Longshore, a Coast Committee member of the ILWU Coast Longshore Division, which is our highest executive body. I started in 1982, some 40 years ago, in the ports of LA, along that's my home port, Local 13. Today, I speak on behalf of 22,000 men and women, and we represent 29 West Coast ports. I also sit on ILWU representative for the joint port action meetings regarding West Coast port congestion, and it started in October of 2021. At that time, it was Port Envoy John Picari. Also, important to note that UP and BNSF railroads have their representatives who participate on those weekly calls as well. And we have the same problems today that we've had months ago when we started having joint action meetings. You know, we had lack of chassis, lack of truck drivers, warehouse space, and most importantly, the rail capacity. And I want you to note that some of the problems, not to reiterate some you might not know, but ILWU was never notified that the railroad shut off the services to and from the West Coast at least 6 times last year because congestion at their own facilities. Trains were backed up about 26 miles into Chicago, and even as the railroads themselves racked up billions and billions of dollars in profits. ILWU requested at that time that the railroads provide us information on the amounts of power equipment, gondola inventories, labor crew sizes for the times before COVID-19, during COVID-19, and at the present time. But as of today, no such information has been provided to us. And the railroads can't even provide us a schedule of the arriving trains into our ports. And all of this has led to a declining schedule reliability, longer wait times and delivery times at the terminals, which ultimately gets passed on to the consumers ourselves. We have had a record number of IPI cargoes sitting on our docks, well over the 9-day dwell times, and this is totally unacceptable. We need to get better. We need the space. We need the space on our docks in order to discharge those containers, the inbound container, import containers onto our facilities, so we can get them out the gates and also receive the inbound, outbound containers going to be exported. But our docks are fully congested. I'll just let you guys know, we rely heavily on the rails, and we've actually in our contracts, we have a 24/7, 365 days a year that we do not stop even during our holidays and our vacation time. We work rails 365. We know how important that is. We negotiated. You guys hear the administration talked about 24/7. We've always had that. You know, our members sort of started throwing up their hands when they heard the administration saying that, you know, they're going 24/7, and they were worried that we were doing something different, and that's not the case. We rely. The rails are a main artery into and out of the ports. We've had we have two huge projects that we push for, infrastructure projects at the ports of LA Long Beach. You know, and they pretty soon that they're going to be starting to break ground in order to achieve more capacity. But we need to move more cargo through the docks, in and out, on rail, and that'll improve our velocity of our shipments and containers. You probably heard the record number of cargo that we moved last year, over 20 million cans in and out of the twin ports, and this year we're on the same record. We're averaging 1.8 million cans a month. There's not another port in the nation that does that or comes close to that. But you know, we want to move more. We hear about market share all the time, and we're losing ships to the East Coast. And you know, right now these carriers are moving cargo to different docks only because of the congestion problems. It's not, you know, if they had their way, they'd be coming into LA Long Beach or in the West Coast and putting their cans on the rail to get to the East Coast side, but that's not the case. But I know you guys want to keep it short. There's a whole slew of problems. But in closing, I want you to know that the ILW supports the need to protect the supply chain workers, such as the truck drivers, the warehouse workers, and the rail personnel. Because without you guys, our docks are going to continue to stay impacted in congestion. And we've gone publicly, and with our president and vice president have put the public statements out supporting the negotiations on that you guys are all having in 2.5 years without a contract. I feel for the workers, and anything that the ILW can do, we're there. Just let us know what we can do. But in order to move our nation's cargo, we need to get better on the rail infrastructure and the movement of cargo on the rail, in and out. So with that, I thank you, Greg, for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity for the ILW to participate. So just let you know that we are there 365 for you guys to move cargo, and let us know what you guys need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank. And I think what you're highlighting here, I think a consistent theme that we're going to hear today, which is that the workers really want to deliver. We want to have a system that's working as efficiently, as strongly as it can, but we're being hamstrung. And unfortunately, workers are often being used as a scapegoat for business failures of the railroads themselves. After the railroads enacted mass job cuts across the industry, they expected the remaining workers to keep up the same level of productivity. Yet there's been an issue with the equipment that they need to keep up productivity. So Jared, what are your thoughts about equipment and how it's affecting services at places such as LA Long Beach?
Sure. Thank you, Greg. I'm Jared Cassidy. I'm the alternate National Legislative Director for Smart Transportation Division. I am just, for a matter of fact, from the craft, have been a conductor and engineer. But as far as the equipment issues, I'm going to echo to what a lot of the folks have said here, and I think I'll take a quick point of privilege to say that one of the unique things about this town hall that you can pick up on quite easily is how it all ties into PSR, or precision scheduled railroading. It's a common question I get asked almost every day. What is PSR? How is it affecting the employees? And the fact is, it's such an ugly monster with so many tentacles. It's hard for any one person to describe in a way that someone can grasp just how ugly it is and how bad it is and how it's devastating this nation's railroad industry and the supply chain. And to Frank's point, which Frank, I want to let you know that we absolutely stand with the longshoremen as well. You have our backs, we have your backs, and we'll be there for you in your all's current negotiations as well. But to the point of equipment, so precision scheduled railroading, has a lot of things. One of the other side effects of it is the growing length of trains. Trains now have grown to a length that are so astronomical that they're 3, 4, we even had one over 5 miles last week. And what that's doing is creating a logjam. Main lines are now being used as sidings. So when you look at equipment, most of our equipment is sitting idle somewhere because a long train has got it blocked, or the long train can't move for other reasons relating to other trains. And so all this equipment is sitting on main lines, it's not getting to the ports. Then the infrastructure itself in the ports is severely deficient. It can't handle the length of these trains. It's made to be fluid. 10,000 feet, from what I understand from our members there, is pretty much the maximum that they can quickly offload and load up so they can get it in and out. But now with the trains running longer, it's extremely hard for them to get it into. It takes a lot more work. It slows the process, and it makes the log jams not just at the ports, but across the country, exacerbated to points that its effect is shown across all aspects of the railroad. Additionally, the inspections take longer. The railroads, as part of this mass layoff or cutting of employees, have eliminated certain crafts from yards or terminals across the country. Carmen are a craft that's kind of hard to come by in some locations. And I don't want to step on anyone's toes, but when that happens, you've got conductors that are now doing inspections that they're not necessarily qualified to do, at least not at the level or at the quality that Carmen do. And that too has an effect on the equipment's availability and the time in which the equipment is turned around. You've also got issues with the train links in the ports for our rail workers. That's just as fundamental as radio communications. Our guys cannot communicate because of the length of trains, and that slows things down tremendously. Like I said, it's fundamental. It seems too fundamental almost, but the reality is when you can't talk and you have a conductor that's a mile behind you and you don't understand what moves are needed, it slows that process as well. Our locomotives, as far as equipment are going, are being abused. There are thousands of locomotives across this nation that are still idle, that are not being used in an effort for the railroads to cut their way to profits. So the locomotives that are being used are being turned. They're not getting any rest, so to speak. They're not getting inspections. They're not getting needed maintenance. And that's having a compounding effect. The other aspect, which has been mentioned, is crews are tight. The railroads are trying to hire, which they have harmed themselves in that process. It's not easy for new hires to come on board. And it's not as attractive as it used to be. Our pay is not where it should be. It's not reflective of our efforts and what our role is in this country. And people are seeing that, so they don't want to come on board. And for the ones that do, they realize that they're being rushed through training, that the railroads aren't giving them an adequate education. And so they go through the process, see what it's all about, get to the actual railroad, and then they're quitting. And so, having that effect come on board and the crews are being rushed through their training, it too is slowing the equipment. And it's my understanding in LA that the crews that are coming out there to work those ports are coming from the yard and don't necessarily have the road experience that's needed to work on that. And then in closing, and lastly, if I could make a point or a recommendation to the STB or whomever is listening, I highly believe that it would behoove this nation and the boards and regulatory agencies that oversee the industry to allow the employees to report in a way that they're protected. Currently, the railroads are self-policing or self-reporting incidents and things that relate to service along with safety. And I'm a firm believer that our folks need to have an avenue or a mechanism for our voice to be heard so that we can highlight the areas where the problems are and not just be reliant upon the railroads. It would make a big difference to getting the information out. But other than that, thank you for the opportunity to be here, Greg.
Thank you, Jared. That was really helpful. Kyle, what are your members seeing? You there?
Yes, thank you, Greg. Kyle Lose, President, Directing General Chairman, District 19, International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. My members are highly skilled craftsmen who maintain and repair locomotives. Unfortunately, the rail companies are not allowing them to properly do their work. They're asking them to do less maintenance, which is a very poor model for railroad locomotive reliability. Like the locomotives that are being run into the ground, unfortunately, these hardworking craftspeople are being run into the ground also. They're being forced to work double shifts, weekends, holidays, all this while they've worked 3 years without a raise, and they're undervalued and underappreciated. These people are most required to take 3 years of training, and now that they've trained them, the railroads are asking them to look the other way and not use the training they received to properly inspect and maintain the equipment. I guess my point is the PS model is do less with less. So not only, there's less equipment available to run, but the equipment is in much worse shape. The members are not allowed to do proper inspections to ensure the equipment is safe. So we're sending out less equipment that's breaking down more and sometimes potentially unsafe, which means rail customers are not receiving the service they need. When the equipment's not available to run the service and the crews are not available, it causes disruptions in the whole supply chain. But mostly, I just want to say, these are highly skilled professional people that show up every day to do their jobs. And all they want to do is continue to do the best work they can do. and it's sure that they provide reliable equipment that these railroads can count on, but unfortunately the PSR model is not allowing them to do that. And until the equipment's maintained properly, the rail systems will not function properly.
Yeah, and Kyle, in some cases, inspections are expected to be completed in 2 minutes or less, which, I know we all are familiar with rail cars. They're pretty large. So the idea that we would have an adequate inspection in that time is really unacceptable. Dean, I want to turn to you. What are your members seeing on the ground, and how have you experienced some of the challenges in the industry?
Oh, greetings, everybody, and thank you, President Reagan. And I want to thank you for all the work you've done concerning this, and also your staff, which also does incredible work for everybody, not only labor, but for the American public. I want to also thank Chairman Oberman for everything he's been doing. He's been very fair and speaking extremely elegantly concerning the situation. My name is Dean DeVita. I'm the president of the National Conference of Firemen and Oilers, SCIU. Our members perform duties at these railroads such as sanding locomotives, fueling locomotives, and getting them prepared to go out and service for the engineers and the conductors. What we've seen is so eloquently said by my friend Kyle is they've cut the locomotives and stored them, and by doing that, they've also cut the employees 30% and maybe even more on certain rails. And by all that happening, our members have to be doing more work in a quick and timely manner so they could get the current equipment out. This is a horrendous situation. And, I would like to make a comment about what my friend Frank said about what's going on out west is that they can't even get a schedule for when the trains are going to come. These people call it precision schedule railroading, and they can't even provide a schedule. What's going on here? It's ridiculous. And you know what? The shippers are hurting. Labor is hurting. But what's really hurting is the American citizen. They're not getting products shipped in a timely manner. And what really was starting to worry me is what will it do for our national defense? God forbid, if we need those locomotives all in storage, put into service immediately. It will not happen. They failed us. And in my opinion, they are violating the Common Carriers Act, and they should be called on the carpet for it. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, Dean, I agree with you that this is an issue, certainly. And really the point of this town hall is to sort of highlight for everybody how this affects the broader American economy, that every single person in this country relies directly or indirectly on an efficient and well-functioning railroad system. And we don't have that right now. So, I think hopefully people understanding that the work that our members do directly to contribute to their well-being, and we want to make sure that we can do it to the best of our abilities. So we've discussed the cuts to workers and equipment. I'd like to talk about the workspace a little bit and what I mean, and by that I mean in the rail yards themselves. Peter, let's go to you now. What have you seen at the rail yards, and how the changes are negatively affecting our supply chain?
Morning, Greg. Thanks for having me on. My name is Peter Kennedy, Brotherhood of Maintenance Away Employees, Division of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. I serve as the Director of Strategic Coordination and Research, but I am always a trackman at heart. I've been in the industry for 19 years. I came off CSX Railroad, off the Garrett subdivision. Now, BMWD members, they work on tracks and at the rail yards, especially with respect to this question. And they also maintain bridges and buildings throughout the railroads right away and all their yards and whatnot. We know that in addition to the cuts to workers and equipment like locomotives, the railroads have sold off yard space, and they've even decreased the size of their yard space or services in their hump yards for that matter, and solely to cut costs and boost their profits in the short run. To give you an example, one of the largest yards in the South of America, of the US here, CSX sold off approximately half of their land from Tillman Yard in Atlanta. That was sold off originally, to my understanding, for the purposes of potentially attracting real estate development near the hot section area of Midtown. Now, with that being said, when you reduce your infrastructure footprint, you obviously reduce your capacity. And so by having less capacity, the railroads are unable to reorganize their trains appropriately or address the demands of their customers. And so what ends up happening is the trains are backlogged on the mainline tracks, and they end up blocking grade crossings as well throughout the communities, and of course the main lines that the railroads their tracks tie into the yards. So you can imagine the ripple effect this has on the economy, communities, and of course the workers when you have these trains blocking yards and main lines. Now, of course, I want to hit on the point too that when you cut 5,000 plus maintenance away workers who maintain these tracks and these yard tracks, you have less people to respond to these issues that come up in the yards routinely. And so run through switches are normal, switches that will not throw, and of course, yard derailments, which by the way, don't get reported very often because they don't meet the reporting threshold, but they're routinely happening in yards for various reasons. And when you cut the workforce, you just can't have the response time that you need to maintain those and get services restored in a manner that meets the demands of your customers. Now, let's also not forget here, because Jared touched on this, is that most train sidings off the main lines and that eventually lead to these yards they were built during a time when trains weren't 3 miles long. They were built during a time when trains were 1 mile long. And so these sidings can't capacitate trains, these mega trains that when exigencies pop up on the railroad, that would require them to run off the main line and into the side there so that the railroads can continue to run trains. So even if you get out of the yard or get into the yard or get out of the yard and onto the main line, the railroads routinely can't capacitate these trains, which again interrupts their services here. Now, the last thing I would say here is that the railroads, haven't maintained their infrastructure to meet capacity. It's all about the bottom dollar here. It's how much they can shave off on the overhead in the short run to make more profit for shareholders in the immediate. And, look, the costs are clear. The workers are paying for it. Their customers are paying for it. And of course, American public consumers are paying for it. And they don't seem to matter in this. And it's time for the railroads, as Dean pointed out, to refocus their attention from serving Wall Street and refocus their commitment back to fulfilling their obligations to serving customers, the American public, and of course, honoring railroad workers.
Thank you, Peter. So there's obviously been cuts to workers and equipment. Those have been, pretty well documented here by our panel so far. The railroads are shrinking, rail yards are shrinking or disappearing altogether. We know that's not all that's happening, though. So I want to turn to the procurement side of things and hear from Mike about what you've seen. Mike?
Sure. Good morning, Greg. Thank you. My name is Michael Baldwin. I'm the president of the Brotherhood of Railroad Signalmen. So railroad signalmen install, repair, maintain, and perform federally required tests and inspections on railroad signal systems. Those systems protect the public from running into trains or vice versa. And they also allow for the safe and efficient movement of train traffic throughout the country on Class 1s and commuter railroads. Procurement, that obviously affects signal systems when you can't get parts. And these parts move in many fashions. Our brothers in the trucking industry may move these parts. They could come in through the ports in containers. But another piece of that is that the railroads also reduced their on-hand inventory of parts. That's all part of this PSR model to cut costs, reduce inventory, mothball equipment, as you've heard. So that makes it difficult for our members to make timely repairs to the signal system. They have cut the workforce of signalmen throughout the country, and what that causes is expanded territories, in length and equipment that you have to repair, maintain, and test, which also means that there's more time traveling to get to locations to perform work or to respond to a case of trouble within the signal system. That causes a reliability issue within the supply chain, because until we can repair the system or the problem in the system, the train is stopped. The train can't move, or the train moves at a very reduced speed, and you've lost all efficiency in the system because the signal system is not allowing for the trains to move at a faster pace. The reliability really is the biggest issue from a signal standpoint that is a negative effect on the supply chain. And again, that reliability is affected by the ability of a maintainer to have time to perform regular and routine maintenance. They don't have time to do that now. All they have time to do are perform these federally required tests and inspections that are required by the Federal Railroad Administration in order for their employer to not be fined, or for themselves to not be fined, because our members work under that type of scrutiny and oversight from the FRA. So the decline in the workforce really for us is a big issue, and we believe it has a major effect on the reliability of the system. And when the system is not reliable and trains cannot move safely and efficiently, obviously that's going to have a negative effect on the supply chain and to the customers and the public. So thank you for the opportunity to participate here today, Greg.
Thank you, Mike. So when you put it all together, I think it's pretty clear we have an inefficient freight rail system that's hampering our supply chain and the industries and the businesses that rely on it. So Jeff, how are these rail service problems impacting the people you represent and U.S. manufacturers in their ability to serve customers?
Thanks, Greg. So I'm Jeff Sloan. I'm Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs for the American Chemistry Council. And ACC is a trade association that represents America's leading chemical and plastics companies. And our companies provide critical inputs for nearly all manufactured goods. I just want to start by saying freight rail service is essential to our industry. We are among the largest rail customers. We ship over 2 million carloads per year. And the problems you've heard about, unreliable, inadequate service that are largely caused by workforce shortages can mean lost production for our members and for their customers. So this further constrains supply chains throughout the economy. ACC recently updated a member survey that we've previously done on supply chain and freight transportation issues. And the findings of this latest round show that the rail service crisis has not abated. So in July, 46% of our member companies reported that rail delays and service challenges had actually gotten worse since the end of last year. And keep in mind, things were not good then either. Most companies are continuing to report longer transit times, missed switches, reduced service days. And on top of that, some of our members have been directly impacted by railroad embargoes, which essentially ration out rail service. Some have gone weeks being allowed to ship only a small fraction of their normal volume to certain customers. So rail customers are then forced to devote tremendous resources to manage these challenges, dedicate employees just to track cars and to work through problems with the railroads. Where possible, they're shifting some shipments to truck just to make sure that their customers get what they need to keep them from shutting down. And I'd also note that in our survey, 43% of companies reported that they were forced to increase the size of their rail car fleet because of rail service problems. So they're using more cars to handle the same number of shipments. And this is really a last resort for shippers. It's a huge capital cost. Plus, you're adding cars to the system, which means more congestion to the rail network. I'd say that, the bottom line is that our industry is growing and we actually want to ship more by rail. But right now, the railroads don't have the workers that they need to handle the business they have.
Thank you so much for that insight. I mean, I think, you really hit the nail on the head there in terms of having the workforce we need. And I think, in order to recruit and retain the workforce that is necessary to provide the service that we've all been highlighting here, the workers need to be treated fairly. They need to have a contract that reflects their hard work. They need to be able to have work rules that provide them with better quality of life. Because we can't just, these aren't just cogs in a machine, right? We are the men and women who are delivering for this country economically, and they deserve to be treated humanely. At this point, I'd like to open up the floor to all of our participants to provide any closing comments. Is there anything we haven't discussed already that you'd like to share? The floor is yours, and you can unmute yourself.
Hey, Greg. Mike Baldwin again. I just wanted to share something. We've had a lot of conversation here today about the supply chain and the effects on the supply chain by reduction in workforce and the ability to repair things. You heard some people begin to touch on another topic, and that's safety. The reduction in the workforce, forcing people to work more hours, longer hours, cover more territory. It creates pressure on the employees. It creates pressure on the equipment. And so the supply chain can be negatively affected even more so when you begin to have an increase in train derailments or broken equipment. But the safety issues that could arise from this business model are just as detrimental to the supply chain as just about anything else. And so safety is also a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you. You're 100% right. Jared?
Yeah, so since he hit safety, which I echo fully, and appreciate Mike for saying that, I want to go back to the customer service aspect, because it was kind of touched on but not really hit on, that our members want to do the work. One of the most frustrating things for our folks is being told to run the service. And what that means in our industry is that if you have a car or cars for a particular location or facility, and it's in your work order or your instructions to deliver those cars, the railroad, for whatever reason, all too often will tell you to run the work and not give the customer the service that they're actually needing. As a conductor and as an engineer, it's extremely frustrating. It's counterintuitive, and it doesn't make sense for us why we wouldn't go ahead and make the delivery while we can, and we have the car there to do it. The bottom line is the railroads are trying to find ways to cut money or to meet their schedules. The scheduling in PSR, like Dean alluded to, while there is no actual scheduling, it's more about getting trains in and out of yards. It's not about getting product to customers. And so for us, it's one of the biggest frustrations in knowing that you have the ability to provide a product, to provide a service, to do your job, and you're kept from doing it so that the railroad might save 5 minutes in overtime, or so that they might be able to make an internal deadline, when in turn, all they're doing is moving cars back and forth. We literally have instances of customers' cars passing a facility more than 5 times before they were being delivered. And this is just nothing more than a product of PSR and internal metrics that are designed around lowering operating ratios, or whatever term you want to call it, that's been self-created by these railroads in an interest to perform for Wall Street, when in reality it's the customers, it's the shippers that are suffering. And in turn, like somebody alluded to, it's the American supply chain that pays the price in the end. And so, one of the cries that we have as rail labor is to just let us do our job, get rid of this PSR thing, go back to providing a service, and let us do what we do best, because that's all we want to do. As long as the railroads are making money, that means we're making money. And if the customers are happy, then we're happy. I mean, it's a simple process. But PSR has destroyed it, and it needs to be reversed. We need to go back to the way the things were.
Thank you, Jared. That's a really strong message. Frank, I see your hand up there.
Yeah, I just want to leave you guys with one thing. Like in the ports, we build the carriers build bigger ships. They build the taller cranes. We're still stuck with the same footprints in our ports, which leaves us no other choice other than stack containers higher and higher. And then we have to try as a workforce to try to move those containers out to get to the end product to the right people. But one of my quotes, and I wrote it down, so I don't want to screw this one up, but I want to leave Jared. Thank you very much. You let us know, President Adams. It was important for us to get on this call today and take a break from my committee. But I want to leave you guys with one thing. It's essential that we as a nation respect and protect the collective bargaining processes and support the railroad workers in their fight to achieve better pay, benefits, and working conditions. The rail company's management decisions have created equipment and labor shortages that have made cargo movement more difficult at our nation's ports and have prioritized profits over domestic benefit. The success of our country rests in the success of its workers and not the greed of corporations that put profits before people. Brother, you guys let us know how we can help, and we'll be there. Thank you. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Frank. So I know we're running a little bit behind here, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I now want to open it up to our media participants and see if they had any questions.